This is a video to show how reference user story sizing works. This is one of the simplest way you can possibly size user stories in Scrum, and it's also one of the quickest. And to get started, you need two things. Thing one is a bunch of stories. And in this example, I'll just call them A, B, C, D, and E. And the second thing you need is one story which everybody on your team understands. Ideally, it's a story that you've already delivered and one that everybody kind of worked on or knew what it took to deliver the story, how complex the testing was, who was involved, and so on and so forth. Let's call this the well understood story. Once you have these two things, just draw a simple scale on your board. A big line will do, and at this point put your well understood story in the middle of the board. Now take the first story in the backlog that you have to size, let's call it story A, and have a good discussion with your team on where it should live. Was it more complex than the well understood story or less complex? If it's more, shove it on the side somewhere over here, and if it was less, you would put it on the other side. Go on and have this discussion for all the stories that are in your backlog. Next up comes B, and maybe you think B isn't as complex as A, but it's more complex than the one story you do understand. Obviously, this will generate a lot of discussion, which is the value of this whole exercise, not necessarily the actual size. Same with C. You might have a discussion and say B and C are kind of the same. Don't debate too much about it because spending too much time on estimation is probably a waste. So C is the same size as B and put it on top of it. D comes along and you're like, this is clearly much less complex than your well understood story, and shove it all the way to the end here. And next, E comes along, and now you can decide where it goes, have another healthy discussion, and you might say it's kinda here. And at this point you have your story stacked in some sort of an order of complexity. Now there are no user story points anywhere on this board. Now if you're tied into it and you want to size them, you can do so quite easily. If you're using Fibonacci, you can quite easily say, well, I'm just going to start with this is a 1, this is a 2, this is a 3, my well understood story is a 5, this might be a 8, and this might be a 13. And at this point you have essentially sized all your stories, put them in sort of order, and also given user story points to it. This is how reference user story sizing works. Very simple, very quick, and remember, the most important part of this is the discussion that all this generates, not the numbers in linear order itself.